What is going on, guys? Welcome to the channel, and today we are going to talk about how to build scalable REST APIs with Django REST Framework. And it should take me a couple of minutes to explain, and if you don't have time to watch this video, then you're going to build APIs that will not be scalable when your application starts to become a little bit more complex than just a hello world application. And all of the things that I'm gonna say today, you will be able to figure out by yourself, but you'll just make a lot of mistakes along the way. And I'm saying that from my experience building different kind of APIs with Django REST Framework, and all of the mistakes that I'm gonna talk about, I did myself before. And before we start looking at any examples, I want to explain what I mean by scalable. And when I talk about scalable, mostly I mean these two assumptions. The first assumption is that your code is easy to change, which is a very important assumption since it always changes no matter what. And if the code is not easy to change, then it's going to be difficult to work with it. And the second assumption is that your code or your software is divided into layers. And every layer has some responsibility. For example, you can have a layer for business logic, another layer for serialization, another layer for your data modeling, and some other layers. It's not important right now, you just need to get an idea what I mean by layers. So keeping these at least two assumptions in mind, let's take a look at some examples of how we can build REST APIs with Django REST Framework. Now, let's say we want to build some endpoints that will allow our clients to create, update, retrieve, delete users. A typical CRUD API. What we usually do in Django REST Framework is we create a viewset class and then we inherit from different mixins. And it usually looks something like that. So we have user serializer that inherits from model serializer. We have password field, which is a write-only field. And we have a user viewset that inherits from different mixins. Nothing unusual here. All of this you will see in Django REST Framework documentation if you open the first tutorial. So all of this will work, however, this approach has a lot of downsides. So let's talk about them. First of all, what if when we create a new user in our system, we want to notify this user by email that the account was successfully created? How can we do that? In order to do that, we need to understand how create model mixin works. So let's open create model mixin. Create model mixin has these two methods, create and perform create. If we look at create method, we will see that first of all, we do some validation, then we call perform create method. And perform create method calls serializer.save. So basically everything happens in this save method. Also, if we look at, for example, update model mixin, we will find the same thing. First of all, we do some validation and then we call perform update method, and perform update method calls save method. So let's try to open this save method. This code is where everything happens. Django REST Framework checks if self-instance is not none. If self-instance is not none, then we update an instance. If self-instance is none, then we create a new instance. So as you can see, everything happens in serializer. So if we want to change the logic of creating a new user, we need to override create method of user serializer. Here's how the implementation of this create method can look like. So first of all, we create a new user by calling create user method, and then we call email user method that sends an email to this user. and at the end we just return a new user. It will work, however, I think it's not the best idea to mix serialization and business logic. I think these things should be separate. Remember that I said before that our application should be divided into layers. So we should have a separate layer for serialization and a separate layer for business logic. So the way we can fix this is by adding a new layer for business logic. And what people usually do is they create services.py file where they write all functions or classes that are responsible for business logic. So let's refactor our serializer class. So now in create method we don't have any logic. In create method we just call create user service function, and if we open this service function we will see that all the logic is here, which is better since serializers shouldn't be responsible for handling business logic. It's not their responsibility. The only thing I don't like about this is I don't like to override create method of our serializer class, but there is no way around this if you are using mixins that built into Django REST Framework. How it can be done differently, I'm gonna show you a little bit later, but for now I think we are done with business logic. So let's move on to the next disadvantage of using viewsets and mixins that built into Django REST Framework. And the disadvantage is that quite often we need a separate serializer for handling request data and a separate serializer for generating response data. For example, let's say we have a token-based authentication on the server. So basically our server should generate and send token to the client somewhere. And a good place to generate and send it, I think, is when we create a new user. When we create a new user, our server should respond not only with information about the new user, but also our server should generate and send token to the client, so that the client can save this token somewhere like local storage or cookies and then send this token back to us every time it makes a new request. So basically we need to change the response of our create endpoint. And in order to change the response of this create endpoint, we need to create a new serializer. Here's how this user create response serializer can look like. So we have a token, which is a char field, and we have a user field that uses user serializer. The question is, how can we use user serializer for handling request data and user create response serializer for generating response data? And if you're using mixins, there is no way to do that. You need to remove create model mixin and implement your own create method. Here's how the implementation of this create method can look like. So first of all, we just validate some data, and if data is valid, then we call save method, and this save method creates a new user, and then we just instantiate our user create response serializer, and we pass a token that we generated and a new user that we just created, and then we use this serializer for our response. So what I found is quite often I need exactly something like that. I need a separate serializer for handling request data and a separate serializer for response data. So what I've decided to do is I've decided to not use mixins at all. I decided to write everything myself since it becomes more convenient. And also what I found is other people on other projects do the same thing. They do not use mixins as well. And I also even found the repository on GitHub called Django StyleGuide. The link will be in the description, and the company that wrote this guide, they have quite similar views on how to build scalable REST APIs with Django REST Framework. However, some of the rules that they have are quite extreme, in my opinion. For example, they do not use model serializers for handling request data, and I don't agree with that point. Another example is they don't use viewsets at all. They recommend you to always create a class that inherits from API view or generic API view. But I prefer to use viewsets without mixins because viewsets give you more RESTful endpoints. But in general, I think that this repository has a lot of good ideas and I recommend you to check this out. Now, if we try to rewrite everything according to what I've just said, the result will look something like that. Here's the implementation of our new user viewset. As you can see, this class doesn't inherit from any mixins anymore because we implement all methods ourselves now. For example, here's the retrieve method. It's quite simple. We just get an object and return a response. Here's the partial update method. We get an object, we validate some data, we call service function update user. Let's take a look at this function. So what we do here is we iterate through user data and we set some attributes. Then we check if password is not none. If password is not none, then we set password. Then we call save and then we return a user. When we updated the user, we instantiate a user serializer and we return a response. Here's the destroy method, quite simple as well. We just get an object and then we call delete user service function. And this service function just calls delete method, nothing special here. So yeah, that's our user viewset class. Now, you probably see a problem. And the problem is that we have some boilerplate code. In the previous implementation, we used mixins. Right now, we write everything ourselves. And if we need to build a lot of different endpoints, we will need to copy and paste a lot of code. So when I was thinking about all of this, I didn't like the idea of copying and pasting code, even though on the project where I worked on before, we were able to successfully use viewsets without mixins. And it worked great, except for this one caveat that we had a lot of boilerplate code. And I remember that I was assigned to do a new task on this project. And the task was about implementing public API from scratch for our clients. Since it was from scratch, I had a lot of flexibility and I was able to do whatever I wanted basically. So what I decided to do is I decided to implement some base or generic classes that we could use and that would solve the problem with boilerplate code. So I did that and it worked really well, so that I decided to implement an open source library. Now I'm gonna show you how to install this library and how to rewrite our viewsets using this library. It can really simplify and reduce the amount of code. But before I start, I have a quick tip for you. This library doesn't have a lot of stars on GitHub, and if I were you, I would probably not use this library. I just don't trust libraries that don't have a lot of stars on GitHub, just being honest with you guys. But you can change this fact, the link will be in the description. You can open GitHub and give it a star. But honestly, I don't care whether you're going to use this library or not. I just want to show you how to write better viewsets and how I do it myself. In order to install this library, you will need to run pip install Django REST-batteries. Now let me show you how our API looks like after rewriting everything using this library. As you can see, we import classes from REST-batteries library. We import mixins from REST-batteries and we import viewset, generic viewset from REST-batteries. Now let's take a look at the implementation of user viewset. So this class inherits from mixins. And as you can see, the implementation of this user viewset class looks like that it has less code than before. And the thing that you've probably noticed is that we have these two dictionaries: request action serializer classes and response action serializer classes. What it means is that we use user serializer for handling request data for create action, and we use user create response serializer for generating response data for create action. Also, we have perform create method. This method returns a dictionary with a token and a new user. and this dictionary will be passed to user create response serializer. The same with update. Perform update updates the user, it returns an updated user, and this updated user will be passed to user serializer. And that's it, that's the implementation of user viewset. The only thing left to discuss is the way you handle permissions in Django REST Framework, because I remember I had some problems with that myself, and I found that other people are also having some difficulties with that. So let's talk about that. When it comes to permissions, you are quite flexible here. There are many different ways you can handle permissions in your application. For example, you can create some specific decorators, or maybe you can create some mix-ins, but we are not going to talk about that right now. We are going to talk about the way Django REST Framework itself recommends you to handle permissions. So let's get back to our previous API version where we wrote everything ourselves. And the most simple example is, let's say we want only authenticated users to have access to our endpoints. So what we need to do is we need to add permission classes attribute to our user viewset. That's basically what you're going to find yourself when you start searching for how to add permissions to Django REST Framework. The problem starts when you want to make your permissions more complex, and you can end up with something like that. We have defined getPermissions method that based on the action sets different permission classes attribute. For example, for create action, it says allow any. For update or partial update, we set current user or admin user. For retrieve, we have is authenticated. For destroy, we set current user or admin user. All of this is going to work, however, in my opinion, it looks a little bit messy. So let's take a look at how we can do the same thing using the library that we installed before. So what we need to do is we need to create action permission classes, dictionary, and keys are actions and values are permissions themselves. And this looks much better in my opinion. And that's it for today, guys. If you are still watching this video, I appreciate it so much. And if you learned something new, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel, because we are going to talk a lot about topics similar to this one. And by the way, all the links will be in the description, and if you need to check out the source code, you can do that on GitHub. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. See you in the next